Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The moonlight filtered through the thick canopy of the forest, casting dappled shadows on the ground as Avril stood at the edge of the sacred grove. Her heart raced with anticipation as she drew a deep breath, her fingers nervously toying with the edge of her silk robe. Tonight, she was to sing the sacred melody, a healing hymn that had been passed down through generations in her village. The air felt charged, as if the very trees around her were listening, waiting for her voice to fill the night. She cleared her throat and closed her eyes, centering herself. When she finally opened her mouth, the first note that escaped her lips was soft, a mere whisper of sound. But soon, the melody grew, swelling with power, as she let the song flow through her. Her voice danced with the wind, intertwining with the rustling leaves and the murmurs of the nearby brook. The magic within the song stirred to life, weaving itself into the air, and as she sang, a soft golden light began to shimmer around her fingertip. Avril could feel the familiar warmth of healing magic radiating from her body. The villagers who had gathered in the grove, many of them sick or wounded, watched in awe as the light enveloped them, their pains easing, their wounds knitting together. The song was a balm to their suffering, and Avril's heart swelled with pride and joy. This was her gift, a gift passed down from her mother, who had been the village's previous songstress. But tonight, something was different. There was a deeper resonance in her voice, a power that she hadn't felt before. It was as if the magic was calling out to something greater, something far beyond the healing melodies she had known all her life. As the last notes of her song faded into the night, the golden light that surrounded her began to flicker, turning a bright, almost blinding white. Startled, Avril gasped, her hands trembling as the light pulsed once, twice, before it vanished. The villagers murmured in confusion, their faces a mixture of awe and fear. Avril looked down at her hands, but they appeared normal again. No trace of the strange light remained. Her pulse quickened. What had just happened? Before she could dwell on it further, a messenger burst into the clearing, his face pale and covered in a sheen of sweat. He staggered forward, clutching his side as if he'd run for miles. Avril out, his voice strained. Dear, the elders, they sent me to find you something. Something terrible has happened. Avril rushed to his side, steadying him with a hand on his arm. Prius, what? Is that what is wrong? Dave. This is the capital, he panted, his eyes wide with fear. Barry, you saw. A dark force is rising. They say it's magic music like yours, but twisted, corrupted. The elders, they fear it, the forbidden melodies, the ones our ancestors locked away centuries ago. The forbidden melodies, the very mention of them sent a chill down Avril's spine. Stories of these dark songs had been whispered among her people for generations, tales of music so powerful it could bend minds, break wills, and corrupt the very essence of life itself. The idea that someone might be using them now after so many years seemed unthinkable. But how could even know the forbidden melodies? Dear Avril asked, her voice trembling with disbelief. The messenger shook his head. No one knows. But the elders say the only thing that can stop it is the song of the sacred spirit. Avril's heart stilled in her chest. The song of the sacred spirit was a legendary melody, said to have been sung by the gods themselves to create harmony in the world. But it had been lost to time, its notes scattered across the land, hidden in sacred sanctuaries. No one had heard the song in centuries, let alone sung it. You must find it, Avril. The messenger continued. You're the only one with the gift, the only one who can summon the sacred spirit. If the forbidden melodies are unleashed, they will destroy everything. The weight of his words settled over her like a heavy cloak. For a moment, Avril stood frozen, the enormity of the task ahead crushing her. She'd only just begun to understand her own powers, and now she was being asked to save the world from a force she barely understood. But as she looked around at the faces of the villagers, her people, the ones she had sworn to protect, resolve hardened in her chest. She couldn't stand by while the world fell to darkness. She had to find the song of the sacred spirit, no matter what it took. I'll go, she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. I'll find the song and I'll stop whoever is using the forbidden melody. The messenger nodded, relief washing over his face. The elders will give you what guidance they can, but the journey will be dangerous. You won't be able to do this alone. As if on cue, a figure emerged from the trees at the edge of the grove. He was tall with shaggy brown hair that fell into his eyes and a well-worn lute strapped to his back. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his lips as he approached. His gait relaxed, despite the tension in the air. "Looks like you're going to need a guide," the newcomer said, his voice smooth and warm like Hundy whiskey. "Stay, and I happen to know a thing or two about sacred song." Avril's brow furrowed as she looked him over. He was clearly a bard, but there was something more to him, something hidden behind his easygoing demeanor. Before she could ask who he was, the messenger spoke again. "This is Cain," he said, across the continent, studying ancient music and magic. "The elders believe he can help you on your quest." Cain gave a low bow, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "Herald at your service, my lady." Avril crossed her arms, her skepticism plain on her face. "'Cause you think you can help me find the song of the sacred spirit." Cain straightened, his expression turning serious. "I know I've been searching for it myself for years, and if what you say about the forbidden melodies is true, then we don't have much time." Avril hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Hi, but this is my mission, not yours. If you slow me down." "I won," Cain interrupted, his voice soft but firm. "You rest, I promise." They set out the next morning, the sun barely peeking over the horizon, as they began their journey toward the first of the sacred sanctuary. The road ahead was long, winding through forests, mountains, and rivers, each step taking them closer to the unknown. As they walked, Avril found herself constantly glancing at Cain, who hummed softly to himself, his fingers strumming invisible chords on the air. There was something calming about his presence, but also something unnerving, like a lullaby that soothed you to sleep while hiding dark undertone. "You've really been searching for the song of the sacred spirit all these years?" Avril asked, breaking the silence. Cain nodded, his eyes distant. "It's more than just a song, you know. It's the key to harmony in this world. Without it, the balance of music and magic can be restored, and the forbidden melody." Cain's jaw tightened. They were like poison Avril music that twists everything it touches. If someone found a way to wield that kind of power, his voice trailed off. But the implication was clear. They walked in silence for a while longer, the weight of their task hanging heavy between them. As the day wore on, they reached the base of a mountain, where the first sacred sanctuary was hidden. The entrance was unassuming, just a small cave, half covered in moss and vine. But as they stepped inside, the air changed, thickening with magic. The walls of the cave hummed with a low, almost inaudible vibration, like the distant echo of a melody just out of reach. "This is it, quote. The third fragment of the song is here." Avril nodded, her pulse quickening. She could feel it too, a soft, pulsing rhythm deep within the cave, beckoning her forward. Together, they ventured deeper into the darkness, their footsteps echoing off the stone wall. The further they went, the louder the vibrations grew, until they reached a small chamber bathed in soft golden light. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and atop it, a single ancient scroll. Avril approached the scroll cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. She reached out to touch it, but as her fingers brushed the parchment, a sudden burst of light filled the room, and the walls around them began to tremble. "What's happening?" Avril gasped, stumbling back as the ground shook beneath her feet. Cain cursed under his breath, drawing his lute from his back. "It set the test," he said, his voice tense. "This sanctuary's testing you. You have to sing now." Avril didn't hesitate. She opened her mouth and let the first notes spill out, her voice rising to meet the vibrations in the air. The melody came to her naturally, as if it had been lying dormant in her heart all along. It was a song of harmony, of balance, a song meant to calm the storm. The shaking slowed, then stopped altogether as Avril's voice filled the chamber. The golden light dimmed, settling into a soft glow once more. When she finished, the scroll hovered before her, and she gently took it in her hand. Avril clutched the scroll tightly, her fingers trembling as the soft light that had filled the chamber began to fade. Her heart was still racing from the intensity of the moment, the melody she had sung echoing faintly in her mind. She felt a strange connection to the scroll, as if it was more than just a piece of ancient parchment. It was a fragment of the song of the sacred spirit, a part of something far greater than she'd ever imagined. Cain stepped beside her, his lute slung over his shoulder, his expression calm but his eyes sharp with recognition. "You did it," he said quietly, nodding toward the scroll, filled with the first fragment. Avril nodded, still catching her breath. "I didn't even know I could do that. It just came to me." Kane smiled, though there was a hint of something deeper in his gaze. "This song chose you for a reason. You were more connected to it. And you realize." Avril wasn't sure how to respond to that. She had always known she was different, that her voice carried magic in a way others didn't she, but this was on another level entirely. She had barely scratched the surface of her powers, and yet here she was, tasked with finding and mastering the most powerful melody in existence. They made their way out of the sanctuary, the cool air of the mountain breeze hitting their faces as they emerged from the cave. The sun had begun to set, casting the world in a golden hue. Avril tucked the scroll safely into her pack, feeling the weight of her responsibility grow heavier with every step. As they descended the mountain, the tension between them eased, the silence no longer oppressive but reflective. Avril's mind raced with thoughts of what was to come. She had the first fragment, but there were more sanctuaries, more tests to face. And somewhere out there, the forbidden melodies were being wielded, threatening to unravel everything. They set up camp at the foot of the mountain, a small fire crackling between them as night fell. Avril sat with her back against a tree, staring into the flames as the events of the day replayed in her mind. She hadn't realized how tired she was until now, the exhaustion settling into her bones. Kane was strumming his lute absently, plucking out a gentle, calming tune that mingled with the crackle of the fire. His presence was a strange comfort, even though she barely knew him. He had helped her through the sanctuary, guided her when she needed it most. But there was still a part of her that didn't fully trust him, something about the way he seemed to know more than he let on. She glanced at him, her curiosity getting the better of her. "You've been searching for the song for a long time, haven't?" Kane paused, his fingers tilling on the strings. He looked up at her, his expression thoughtful. "Yes, longer than I care to admit." Why are you so invested in finding it?" Kane leaned back, resting his head against a log, his eyes drifting to the stars above. "Because I know what sits at stake. The forbidden melodies. They were not just dangerous. They were destructive, and the people who wield them think they can control that power, but they can tie. Avril frowned, leaning forward. "You're doing here." He sighed, his gaze darkening. "The forbidden melodies don't just corrupt those who listen. They corrupt those who play them. It twists their minds, makes them believe they retain control, when really the music is controlling them." Avril shivered, the fire suddenly feeling much too small to ward off the chill in the air. Terror, so whoever is behind this, they already lost. "Maybe not yet," said softly. But they on the path. That's why we have to find the song of the sacred spirit before it's not too late. It's not the only thing powerful enough to restore balance. Avril didn't respond, but her thoughts churned with the weight of what he had said. Forbidden melodies were more dangerous than she had realized. And if they had already taken hold of someone capable of wielding that kind of power, the consequences could be catastrophic. The next morning, they set out early, the sun barely rising over the horizon. The second sanctuary was farther away, deep within the heart of a forest, known for its strange shifting paths and the ethereal creatures that roamed within. It was a place few dared to go, but Avril and Kane had no choice. Time was running out. As they entered the forest, the air grew thick with magic. The trees towered above them, their branches intertwining like a web blocking out the sunlight in places. A soft hum vibrated through the ground beneath their feet, the same pulsing rhythm that had guided them in the first sanctuary. The deeper they went, the more disorienting the forest became. The paths seemed to twist and shift around them, leading them in circles or to dead ends. Avril felt a growing sense of unease, her connection to the magic in the air becoming more erratic. "We were being tested again," Kane said quietly, his eyes scanning the surroundings. "Yuri, this place is alive with magic." Avril nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She closed her eyes, reaching out with her mind, trying to find a melody that would guide them forward. Slowly, she began to hum a soft, tentative tune that grew stronger with each note. The air around them shifted. the trees seeming to part slightly, creating a narrow path ahead. Kane raised an eyebrow, impressed. Looks like you re-getting the hang of this. Avril allowed herself a small smile, but her focus remained on the melody. They followed the path, Avril's song leading the way until they reached a clearing. In the center stood a large ancient tree, its bark glowing faintly with a soft, golden light. At its base lay another scroll, nestled among the roots. Avril approached the tree cautiously, her voice never faltering as she continued to hum. The ground beneath her feet seemed to hum in response, a deep resonant tone that echoed her melody. She reached out, her fingers brushing the scroll, and for a moment, the world around her stilled. But just as her hand closed around the parchment, a sudden, jarring dissonance filled the air. Avril gasped, stumbling back as the once harmonious melody twisted into something dark and chaotic. The trees around them groaned, their branches swaying violently as the very forest seemed to turn against them. Kane was on his feet in an instant, his lute in hand, deficit the forbidden melody. Avril's heart raced as she scrambled to regain her footing. She could feel the dark music seeping into her mind, its twisted notes wrapping around her thoughts like a vice. She clutched the scroll to her chest, fighting to maintain control. Kane began to play, his fingers flying over the strings of his lute as he countered the dissonant melody with a song of his own. His music was sharp and fast, like a blade cutting through the darkness, but it wasn't enough. The forbidden melody was too strong, too insidious. Avril knew what she had to do. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to focus, and began to sing. Her voice rose above the chaos, clear and powerful as she poured every ounce of strength she had into the song. The melody that flowed from her lips was unlike anything she had ever sung before. It was pure, untainted by fear or doubt. It was a song of light, of hope, of balance. The dissonance faltered, the dark melody wavering as Avril's song grew stronger. The trees stopped their violent swaying, the air growing still once more. And then with a final powerful note, the forbidden melody shattered, its twisted echoes fading into nothingness. Avril collapsed to her knees, her breath coming in, ragged gasps. The scroll was still clutched tightly in her hands, its ancient magic thrumming beneath her fingers. She had done it. She had won. Kane knelt beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "You did it," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. "You broke the forbidden melody." Avril nodded weakly, too exhausted to speak. She had never felt so drained, both physically and mentally. The power of the song had taken everything out of her, leaving her feeling hollow and raw. But as she looked down at the scroll in her hands, a sense of determination filled her once more. This was only the beginning. She had 2 fragments of the Song of the Sacred Spirit, but there were more to find, more tests to face. And somewhere out there, the forbidden melodies were still being wielded, still threatening to destroy everything. She wouldn't test up. She couldn't test up, not until the Song of the Sacred Spirit was complete and the balance of music and magic was restored. The journey was far from over.